Pope Francis has revised the Catechism to teach the death penalty is inadmissible. A new draft of paragraph 2267 of the Catechism of the Catholic Church was issued by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith last week, after Pope Francis approved it back in May. Until the announcement, the Catechism taught cases for execution are very rare, if not practically non-existent. But now the Catechism says, in part, the Church teaches, in the light of the gospel, that the death penalty is inadmissible because it is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person, and she works with determination for its abolition worldwide. To break down what this all means, we turn now to our expert panel. Father Thomas Petri is a moral theologian and academic dean at the Dominican House of Studies. Dr. Matthew Bunson is a Catholic historian, theologian, and a senior contributor here at EWTN. Thank you both for being here. Really important conversation to have.
Thanks for having me.
Good to be with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. First off, is this a change in church teaching?
No, the headlines last week were saying this when the revision of the Catechism came out, but the Holy Father is not changing the church teaching because the Pope cannot change church teaching. The Church teaches that the state has a right to use the death penalty. The Holy Father, in this revision, following upon John Paul II's revision in 1997, is simply saying that given certain circumstances in modern society, the death penalty really ought not to be used. It's inadmissible, he says.
What spurred this development?
Well, the key is the phrase, the very word that Pope Francis uses, inadmissible. Building, as his father said on the 1997 revision of John Paul II, who used the term very rare, if not non-existent. Right. That's an important qualifier because what we're seeing in the Western world, a better understanding of the penal system, a better understanding of rehabilitation, a better way of detention. So we are moving away in the Western world, at least, from the traditional need for capital punishment. And so we have seen this as a fairly consistent series of programs and statements from the modern popes, from John Paul II to Pope Benedict XVI, who also advocated for the abolition of the death penalty, now to Pope Francis, who's re-emphasizing all of the points of his most immediate predecessors.
I see. And Father Petri, as the Dominican here, what was it that Church Doctor St. Thomas Aquinas taught about capital punishment?
Well, St. Thomas Aquinas, like everyone of his day and most of the Church Fathers and Scripture, would see punishment primarily to redress and to restore the common good, that a crime takes something from the community, and that there are some crimes, the Church teaching has said, that simply can only be repaid by the offender's life through the penalty of death. So St. Thomas was always very clear that the death penalty was something that the state could do. He, like many others, encouraged Christians not to participate in it themselves, but he also said the death penalty ought not to be used if it creates more evil than good. He was always very clear on that. So the question is, what creates more evil than good? Does the death penalty actually create good that outweighs any evil it might also create?
That being said, how do we view past cases of capital punishment?
The Church has always taught that the death penalty is acceptable, so this doesn't change that. We can look back, and as most conscientious persons do, and wonder, was this case a legitimate use of the death penalty? Was this person innocent really or guilty really? And that will always be the case, but it doesn't change the nature of the death penalty as it's applied, because the death penalty is not intrinsically evil. Abortion remains intrinsically evil. It will always be intrinsically evil. The death penalty, and the Holy Father has not declared the death penalty as intrinsically evil. The principle is that the punishment should fit the crime, but that also, given what we understand now about, as Matthew said, Dr. Bunson said, that it should also lead towards rehabilitation and the protection of society. And in the Western world, in the developed world, we tend to see that taking an offender's life is no longer necessary.
That really is key, that word intrinsic evil, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is. And when we go back to the way that the revision of the Catechism has been written, we see the use of the word inadmissible that we've talked about several times now. That is a world apart from the possible decision to use the term like intrinsically evil. So we're making it clear again that capital punishment is not intrinsically evil in the same way that we consider and teach very powerfully that abortion is intrinsically evil. But we're also looking at the dignity of the human person within the context of the modern world, but we can also look back in time. You were just asking about the death penalty in history. Christians fought against the pagan Roman Empire, and one of the weapons that was used against Christians was the institutional injustice of the death penalty upon them. We are now living for the last 300 years or so with the use of the death penalty under similar circumstances to pagan Rome.
Wow.
We're living in a kind of neo-pagan culture today. Think of the French Revolution. No one could argue that the French Revolution had a fair application of the death penalty. Certainly the Soviet Union didn't, the communist governments like China don't, Nazi Germany certainly did not. And in a culture today where the dignity of the human person is under threat from so many different directions, abortion, euthanasia, the wearing away of our understanding of the human person, our resistance to the death penalty assumes sort of the context of doing everything we can in culture to help people form their consciences properly in how we build up the dignity of the human person, but also to resist our temptation to wear it away.
That is incredible context to keep in mind. And speaking about the dignity of the human person, what about the dignity of the criminal person? Do they lose their inherent dignity after the crime if they are on death row?
No, they never. By simply being a member of the human species, we believe everybody has an inalienable, intrinsic human dignity made in the image of God, regardless of ability or disability, regardless of creed, regardless of race, regardless of financial and social status, and in fact, regardless of what we have done and what we haven't done. Now, what they do lose is a certain dignity as a citizen in our society because they are being imprisoned, but they never lose, and the Church has never taught, and to my knowledge, no Christian has ever taught or thought that criminals somehow lose their dignity. St. Thomas made a comment that people often use in this regard. He said that criminals can be executed if they've committed a very serious crime because they're more like beasts. And people often say that St. Thomas says that they don't have any dignity after they commit a crime, but he doesn't say that. I would argue what he's actually saying is that they are losing their status within society. And that's something I think everyone agrees with, that when you commit a crime, you lose certain privileges as a citizen.
And finally, we are on Pro-Life Weekly. So for our viewers, our Catholic viewers who are passionate about the pro-life issue, how should they view the capital punishment issue in the wider frame of all life issues?
Well, we have to be careful to fall into sort of a false equating of the death penalty with something like abortion. We have the arguments we've been hearing for a long time about the seamless garment. Capital punishment is listed now in the Catechism as inadmissible, as a prudential application of the Church's understanding. Abortion is intrinsically evil. Euthanasia is intrinsically evil. So that's a balance that we have to maintain and keep in front of us as we discuss this issue.
I think that Dr. Bunson is exactly correct here, that by focusing on the death penalty as a way in which life is taken, by insisting that even criminals, that their lives should not be taken in the modern world, all the more now we should be able to focus on that the innocent, that their lives cannot be taken in abortion and euthanasia.
Thank you both for your incredible clarity and knowledge on this important issue.
It's a privilege to be with you.
Thank you so much.